Welcome to the Thriving Mayor Show, the weekly broadcast featuring former and current mayors who are thriving, sharing their story, insight, wisdom, and viewpoint. Join us and comment on social media as we meet another of the superheroes we elect to lead the rejuvenation of our towns and cities and who serve us all. Visit www.thrivingmayor.com to learn more. Here we go. Good morning, everyone. It's Michael Hubicki, the host of the Thriving Mayor Show. It's July 7th, 2021, episode 28. And today I'm super happy to have a friend and colleague on the show who is Mike Robbins. And Mike is the chairman of the Center for Responsible Travel and also a co-founder of the tourism company and a longtime friend. And we've worked on several projects together. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Michael. Glad to be here. I'm not a mayor, but hopefully mayors will find what I have to say about CREST and
that's awesome.
Interest, so.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they will, and we all will. And of the 28 episodes that we've done so far, Mike, I think probably 20 have been mayors. So we do love to have special guests on that have something relevant, topical, and important to say about our cities and towns. So, Mike, we'll start the show by honoring the land and the Indigenous peoples who've lived here from the beginning. And when I say here, I mean the Bay of Quinte in Ontario. I'm grateful for the opportunity to live here and thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. In particular, I honor the ancestors of the land, the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. This territory is covered by the 1783 Crawford Purchase. Now a little bit about Mike, and we'll learn more in a minute, but just from his bio. Mike Robbins is an adventure traveler, tourism management consultant, ski area designer, philanthropist, volunteer board member, masters alpine ski racer with a passion for empowering remote Indigenous communities through responsible tourism. He is currently a founding partner with the tourism company, chairman of the board with the Center for Responsible Travel, a philanthropist donor through the 7th Generation Fund at Make Way, formerly Tide Canada, King Penguin with Linking Tourism and Conservation, and fellow international member of the Explorers Club. The Center for Responsible Travel, CREST, is a global nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., dedicated to increasing the positive global impact of responsible tourism. Through innovative field projects, research, consultancies, and advocacy, CREST is taking action to address 4 of the world's key threats to securing a sustainable future, and those are climate change, over-tourism, biodiversity, and cultural heritage loss, and inequitable access to wealth. Amazing, Mike. That's quite the bio, and congratulations.
It's been a fun journey.
That's great.
A lot of years.
Yeah. Now, Mike, just as we get going here, remind me, did you ski down Mount Ucaymadan in Morocco during one of our site visits?
I did. Yes. Yeah. And I skied with one of the local instructor, right? A Moroccan fellow who had equipment from, I don't know. I mean, this was when were we there? About 10 years ago?
It was at least 10 years ago, yeah.
Maybe 12 years ago. Anyways, he had equipment from the 70s or something.
Yeah, which was obsolete then.
And he had an old ski jacket hand-me-down from some other French ski school somewhere in France, probably. And then he had his tag, instructor, and he was very proud and hugely proud to show me the mountain, and we had a blast.
Yeah. Now, and so our story, Mike and I's story, was that we worked together on a ski resort in Ucaymadan, Morocco. And at one point in time, I think still, Ucaymadan has the highest chairlift in Africa. And possibly at one point, it might have had one of the highest chairlifts in the world. And we don't really think about Africa as a ski destination, but the high Atlas Mountains do get snow and have the proper kinds of slopes for ski resorts. And Mike's knowledge of ski resort planning and slope and run design, coupled with his responsible tourism, were invaluable to our international team. And I often recall our trips up that chairlift and the back trails at Akamada and the spectacular scenery and the views there, and the local Berber culture. And it was such an incredible place. And we all wanted to tread as lightly as we could, right, and to be as responsible as we could, but to help share this amazing resource with others.
Yeah, and if you recall, first thing in the morning we'd look up in the mountains from the base area, right, and we'd see there's pathways everywhere, and then you'd see these the huts that sort of organically growing out of the rock. They're made with rock, right? Then you'd see little figures emerging out of those huts, and you'd notice that they were guys coming down, hiking down with skis and boots on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And then they'd come down and put them at the base of the area, and they were the rentals. People would come along and try the boots on and pick the ones that fit, and away they'd go. And then charge them cash, whatever.
Yeah, really amazing
place.
Yeah, I remember the one trip we tried to get the whole team up to the mountain out of Marrakesh, and it had snowed. I think one of the 2 or 3 snowfalls the resort gets each year, and there was 2 feet of snow fell in about 24 hours, and then some boulders came down on the road, and then it took a couple of days for the one plow, which had also broken down, to get up the mountain pass and clear the road, but hardly any of the cars had snow tires.
Right.
So it was that was always a real challenge. But and that just goes to show that there's so many things that we take for granted here, that when we do look at trying to be responsible and do responsible development, and there's so many factors that have to be considered, that like right down to the type of tires that the vehicles have for safety and accessibility, that it's so complex.
Yes.
Yeah. Mike, where did you spend your early years, your preteens and teens, and was travel a big influence in your early years?
Yeah, well, yes, of course it was. I mean, I grew up in Toronto in Don Mills. My dad was a road engineer and road building.
Mine too.
Yeah, that's right. And I used to spend a lot of time. My parents were avid skiers, so they came to Collingwood before I was around on the train. And then my dad was one of the founding directors of one of the ski clubs here, the private ski clubs. And he built a little chalet when we were very young at the bottom of that ski area. So I used to spend a lot of my years coming up here in the summers before people were coming up. I mean, now it's a popular destination, Blue Mountain, right?
Yeah.
In Georgian Bay. But in those days, people would come in the winter and it was empty in the summer. And we were pioneers for windsurfing on Georgian Bay. And then we started to travel and compete. And I was a ski racer as a young guy too. So I traveled a lot across Canada and down to the States ski racing. So I've always been a competitive athlete character, I guess. So travel has definitely, and I had on my mother's side, her parents were from Finland. So they had a little very basic cottage up near Perry Sound on a little lake with a sauna, burning log cabin that they built. That was the first thing they built, right? And then they built a cottage, and we still have that in the family.
Oh, that's cool. And what kind of schooling did you do, Mike, to position yourself, equip yourself to be a tourism consultant?
Yeah, no, it's kind of serendipitous, really. I went to university and took resource management at Guelph, and came out as an environmental planner, and I was hired. My first job in my professional life. I was hired as an environmental planner in the tourism and environmental planning department at a big multidisciplinary firm, Marshall Macklin Monahan,
Okay.
who most people have heard of. I think it's MSP now, merged into MSP. And in those days, the environmental planning I was doing was going out to future subdivision sites and inventorying the environmental resources and what to save and what could go and all that. And my colleagues in the office were working on the provincial tourism strategy for the province of BC and the regional plans and some other interesting projects. And I started to take obviously a bit more interest in the work they were doing, and
Yeah.
volunteered to help, and that's what happened. So I started to get involved in tourism projects, and it was a real learning environment at MM&M, and they allowed me to do that, and so I made the transition early on, and the environmental planning background came in very handily because I've always had a tendency in leaning towards more responsible forms of tourism, because
Yeah.
I realized from the early days of my career that tourism can be quite a destructive force if not managed properly, right?
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. So somebody who wants to get into tourism, or not necessarily like resort planning and operating a resort, but doing what you do, as being a special advisor, a consultant to do tourism, so especially responsible tourism. Are there programs in Canada or North America now that people can?
Yeah, sure there are. There are lots of tourism, different tourism programs. Ryerson University, for example, has strong tourism programs, and different universities across Canada and into the States. And universities like George Washington University in Washington have extremely strong credentials in tourism and responsible tourism as well, and connections
Right.
in that area. And and that's the important thing. I think that I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can come at tourism, from the financial end of things with an MBA, or from a resource management perspective with a more of an environmental focus,
Mm-hmm.
or with a strong cultural focus, right? Because it's all part of tourism. Tourism is essentially storytelling, right? And all about the a place, a destination, or a place's authenticity, and the sights and sounds and people, and things that differentiate that destination from other destinations, and are going to attract people that are willing to pay for experiences that can be developed around those.
Yeah, yeah, and within each of those, there's probably specializations. As an example, the cultural or ecological ecotourism and things like that. So it's somebody who's interested in it can really dive deep and make a huge impact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's niches that are in need of good, creative, driven, hardworking individuals, right? That have a passion for travel and tourism, and like the Indigenous tourism sector, for example, right? I mean, it's one of the fastest growing sectors in Canada. I think hopefully it is going forward. Tourism came to an abrupt halt with the pandemic, but
yeah.
So there are some real interesting niches that young people can get engaged and involved in, and truly make a difference going forward, right?
Yeah, and nowadays, Mike, with the internet and YouTube and blogging, and it's incredible, the explosion of interesting shows and storytelling that people are doing. There's a show that we like to watch now called Magic Carpet, and it's about a young woman from Toronto who bought a sailboat for $1 out in BC, and then she got another sailboat with her partner, who's a Swiss boat builder, and they took it up the canals in France and up the Rhine, and then right now they've just bought a 40-foot sailboat, and they're rebuilding it somewhere in Oregon, I think, and just wonderful storytelling, and the videography, and the way that they put it together, and they are very responsible, very, very responsible. But they never put that's not the theme, but it's the undercurrent. It's the philosophy, which is super, super powerful. What areas of travel and tourism really excite you, Mike? And have they changed over time?
Of course. I mean, the tourism industry and landscape and tourists are changing and evolving constantly. I mean, I love to travel, and I love to travel to places that are probably a little bit lesser known, where and adventure destinations. I just finished a big project. And I was the project manager working on behalf of CREST, the Center for Responsible Travel, because they do get involved in consulting assignments that are relevant to their mission, in Oman, in the Middle East.
Oh yeah,
multi-year project, and it was in a region of Oman, like a province or state, South Al Sharqiya, which is full of diverse resources, from mountains to sea coast to cultural heritage to wadis to deserts, and so on. And that is definitely a place that I would love to go back to as a tourist, right? I get a taste for it doing the work, but I'd love to go back there and explore. But you know what I'm really passionate about is Indigenous tourism and remote tourism, and I've done a lot of work in that area as a result of that passion. And we have so much to learn from Indigenous peoples all over the world, right? And the way to do that is travel with them on the land in their traditional territories or homelands, right? So I've had some pretty neat experiences professionally, business-wise, and then I have had a few instances where I've gone back and with kids or whatever to share that experience.
Can you just share maybe one of those with us, Mike? Like, what was it like, and the feelings, the emotions that conjures up for you when you're with the people, the local people, and experiencing life, in an Indigenous way?
Well, I mean, it's hard to just focus in on one. I mean, I've had so many amazing, unique experiences, but I did spend a particularly long period of time working with an Inuit community in the Eastern Arctic, on the west side of Hudson Bay, north of Churchill, Manitoba, a community called Arviat, second largest Inuit community in Nunavut, and a very traditional community. And I went there to help them develop a community-based, community-owned and operated tourism program over a period of 5 years, with funding that came from a particular land claim related to federal bird sanctuaries and wildlife areas, that, in their case, a bird sanctuary adjacent to the community. But so I over that 5 years, I had so many different experiences, but you gain when you travel with them, particularly when you travel with them on the land. And this applies to all Indigenous people, right? I mean, they're not as natural in communities, but when they're back out on the land, they're in their element. And particularly if you have the opportunity to travel with elders, right, who have the skills and the knowledge, right, that's passed down. There's a disconnect now in a lot of cases, but it's unbelievable, their skills to survive in that environment and landscape. And I was in Arviat in all seasons, at all times of the year, and always got the opportunity on weekends to travel out on the land, right, hunting or fishing or just tagging along, right, with whatever. And it's just, they're non-judgmental. They have such a great sense of humor, and they have incredible survival skills and knowledge of their land. I mean, there's something like 30 or 40 different words for different ice conditions and snow conditions, right? I mean,
it's incredible.
Yeah.
The one of the first episodes of the show was Mayor Merlin Racinos of Igloolik.
Ah, okay.
And
he has a great community, very traditional.
Yeah, and he on the flight up from Ottawa, the guy beside him said, "Oh, you've never been to Igloolik before, have you?" Yeah. He goes, "No, why?" "Well, you're wearing shorts and flip-flops, and there's a snow blizzard." This is October. He was leaving Ottawa, and so he got there, and the flight attendant gave him her coat. He walked in, and he went on a short contract there. And one evening, late in the evening, they went fishing. It was midnight sun. They went fishing on a delta, and he said, "Well, I probably should get going because I have to open up the store at 9 a.m." And the guy said, "Well, it's already 11 a.m. Like, you missed that 2 hours ago." He said it was so, he knew then that he never wanted to leave, that the people and the atmosphere and the chemistry and the love and the nature just drew him in. And he's been there ever since. And now he's the mayor.
Igloolik has the world's only Inuit circus.
Yeah.
Artsilk. A friend of mine, Guillaume Saladin, whose dad was an anthropologist, and Guillaume grew up with his dad in Igloolik, so he speaks Inuktitut. But he's a circus guy in Montreal, and then he goes for half the year to Igloolik. But he created the circus, right? And
that's amazing.
They helped us in Arviat to train the cultural performance groups that sprung out of people's interest in Arviat. And anyways, the Arviat program was very successful, and that's just one good example.
Yeah, really amazing. It's so inspirational to hear people talk about the North and being in our Indigenous communities and with Indigenous peoples. Mm-hmm. So, Mike, tell us a little bit about some of these other personal interests, like the Seventh Generation Fund, King Penguin, and the Explorers Club. Is King? Are you a King Penguin, or is it the King Penguin? Like, what is
that? So linking, there's an organization based in Norway called Linking Tourism and Conservation, and it was started by a fellow by the name of Peter Prokosh, and he set up his membership categories as different levels of penguin. So a king penguin is like me, is just somebody who has made a little larger fee payment, but has a louder voice in the organization. And I've written a number of examples of linking tourism and conservation. That the LT&C is the acronym, but they're closely affiliated with the UN. One of the UN organizations, so they try and influence through case studies, and I'd written case studies on First Nations communities in Canada that have successful tourism initiatives that have also strongly aligned with conservation within their traditional territories. And the ones that I wrote were related to the Great Bear Rainforest in BC, where I've done work and where I've volunteered some time and helped some of the communities and the businesses out there. And philanthropically as well. I have.
Yeah, and what is the Seventh Generation Fund at Make Way?
Probably about 12 years ago, I took a portion of my personal wealth from certain circumstances that I had and that I wanted to devote to philanthropy over a period of time, and instead of creating my own foundation, which, I mean, I didn't have the resources to do that anyways, but I worked through a public foundation, Tides Canada, which is now Make Way. It changed its name a couple of years ago, and so I set up. It's a donor directed fund held by Make Way, mm-hmm. and I came up with the name Seventh Generation Fund, and so I make donations into the fund, and then they deploy, and then I recommend projects to make way to place those funds, and then they help me leverage those funds into projects that have other funders affiliated with them. And so as a result, I've been involved in some really philanthropically in some really interesting large-scale conservation, and my focus with my fund is Indigenous cultural and ecotourism, recognizing that our Indigenous peoples in Canada live in some of the most important natural areas, particularly their traditional territories, not necessarily their reserves, right?
Yeah.
Stuck to, but so the Great Bear Rainforest is one good example of an initiative that I've been very involved in over the years.
Can people find information about that online, or is it possible for others to contribute to that?
Oh yeah. So yeah. I mean, you can. There's a number of things you can do. I mean, the Make Way, what used to be Tides Canada, funnels dollars to initiatives, right? And they accept donations, or they accept individuals like myself coming in and setting up a donor-directed fund, and then that's one way. And then there's an organization called Coast Funds that exists now to help support conservation-oriented economic activity in the Great Bear. That has a substantial fund that was donated by philanthropists and government, and they're helping support a lot of the businesses in particularly these days in getting through the pandemic, right? And with dollars that help catalyze larger scale investment in ecotourism or cultural tourism, and as well as sustainable forestry and sustainable fishing and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a large scale conservation initiative of global significance, I would say.
Wow, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. I'll put in the show notes, Mike, some links that we can chat after. I'll make sure I get those correct. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about being chairman of the Center for Responsible Travel, and sort of like the scope of that. Sounds like, well, based in Washington D.C., it's obviously pretty significant.
Yeah, I'm actually in my last year on the board of CREST. So we have you're allowed to serve 2 consecutive 5-year terms, which is pretty long in the scheme of things, right? We changed it over the years to adapt to our needs. But so I joined them 10 years ago as a director, and then I've probably been chair for about 6 years now. And so CREST, and I'll use the acronym. CREST is stands for the Center for Responsible Travel, and it was founded by 2 people. Dr. Martha Honey, who was originally an investigative journalist, but she wrote a number of books. Her most important book, and her original book, was Who Owns Paradise, and it was really the definitive piece in those days on ecotourism and what was happening around the world with mass tourism and how ecotourism could benefit, and the other co-director was Dr. William Durham, a professor of anthropology at Stanford University, and they formed CREST. It had a different name for the first year, I think, but the year after the UN had declared the International Year of Ecotourism in 2002, and there was a big conference in Montreal. And so they created CREST, and they had a focus on ecotourism, so smaller scale tourism businesses that adhere to ecotourism principles. And then over the years, it's expanded its influence and sphere of research. But it's really it's a nonprofit 501(c) in the States that focuses on solid research. And have research that then influences policy and development and so on, right? A lot of peer-reviewed research work, right? So, and there, the CREST, the mission of CREST is promoting responsible travel, where local communities thrive and steward their cultural resources and their biodiversity. So the whole thing with tourism is that it can be mass tourism in particular can be very destructive, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of economic leakage. And the Arctic is a good example, actually. So for years, there's been tourism up in the Arctic, but it's been dominated by Southern companies that go up there and set up their fishing and hunting camps initially, right? And they may hire a few local guides, but most of the economic benefit leaks back down south, right? And very little benefit accrues to the Inuit communities in the north, or the First Nation or Inuit. That's evolved over the years and changed. Now we have the expedition cruise companies and so on going up there. But again, still, it's dominated by Southern interests, Southern companies, and a lot of the benefits flow back south. So, the effort of CREST is really to focus on tourism that really does three things. One, it helps protect the local environment, or actually results in a net benefit to the environment.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Tourism that supports the local community and helps conserve local cultures, and tourism that educates the guests, the visitors, the tourists. Right. So those are really the three principles, and there's a lot of different terminology out there, from responsible tourism, ecotourism, now regenerative tourism, etc. But it all boils down to those basic three principles, right? And that's the way tourism should function, even in urban areas, right? We should, So, So that's and.
I think it's really interesting that it's called Center for Responsible Travel, as opposed to tourism, because travel encompasses all of mobility, and so that we really shouldn't just think about being responsible while we're tourists, but when we're traveling. So when we're shipping goods, as an example. So it really has to span across all aspects, all modes of our society and our economy. It would totally make sense.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned about urban travel and urban tourism. One of my favorite projects, Mike, from my 31 years being a consultant, was with your partner, Darcy McKittrick, that we did back in 2000. It was the town of White River tourism master plan for Winnie the Pooh.
Right.
And Winnie the Pooh, everybody knows Winnie the Pooh, the A.A. Milne series, was actually an orphaned bear that Lieutenant Harry Colburn adopted in White River on his way to fight in World War I in England. And he bought the bear from a trapper who found that orphaned bear, and that was in White River. And then he donated Winnie to the London Zoo, and A.E. Milne brought his son Robin to the zoo, and Robin fell in love with Winnie, and he nicknamed him Winnie the Pooh. And then A.E. Milne started to write the books. And in addition to Winnie the Pooh, White River also, from a tourist perspective, I don't know how successful this is, but they also claim to be the coldest place in Canada, minus 72 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Probably not the best ad or marketing copy for a place. But the tourism master plan was a lot of fun. And Darcy and I got to go up and work with the mayor and the community and the residents, the local tourism people, and we looked at a museum, campground, trails, a playground, a music venue, and did a business plan for them. And that was one of the first tourism projects I got to work on, and it was really opened my eyes to a whole another kind of realm of our cities and towns, and how we could leverage the culture and the stories or other resources that we have to attract people in.
Yeah, I mean, in my early days of my career, when I would get involved in urban tourism master planning, I mean, I've done a lot of tourism master planning. As I said, the first project was the provincial tourism strategy for BC way back in 1979 and 80. But in early urban tourism master planning, it was always looking at, I think we called it the blue list of essentials, right? Competitive essentials. You had to have, a convention center. You had to have eventually a trade center. You had to have, you had to have an aquarium. You had to have all these things, right? But in the end, we all began to realize that they were all making, and all the chain hotels and so on, right? All those things that we were trying to achieve from a competitive perspective were making the cities the same, right?
Homogenous, yeah.
Homogenous, right? And the real essence of tourism is your character of place, right? What differentiates your city from other cities, right? And that's, anything from, the food, the culinary, the locally owned accommodation businesses, the cultural heritage that is unique, all the stuff that allows for innovative and creative storytelling, right? So that's what you need to build on and magnify and create experiences around that, rather than trying to copy and trying to do what other apparently successful cities are doing, right? So that's, and the other big thing is that cities have always, destination marketing organizations, those entities that are set up by cities to market the destination, have focused primarily on marketing. But now we recognize that there's an equal or more responsibility to focus on management of the destination as well as marketing. So, they're really better defined as destination marketing and management organizations, right? And a lot of places are adapting and evolving into that model, but it's taking time, and some still are not, right?
Yeah. What are some of your maybe favorite or examples of responsible travel in cities and towns? And I think maybe if there's one or two in Canada that you could cite as good examples that other communities can look to as sort of the benchmark.
Well, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, all of our cities have unique and different events and festivals, which is really important. And typically they have, like Calgary, the Stampede, and they become defining features or events for those destinations, and they help to drive visitation and help to compel, a time-sensitive visitation. But the cities like St. John's in Newfoundland, I would say, has always been, very unique and different, right? Our big cities, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and so on, they've all got the same mixture of chain hotels, and they've all got the big convention centers and trade centers, and they went that route, right?
Yeah.
But it's those cities that have really recognized that what they have that differentiates them, and that's unique, and that's the real character of that city, right? The cultural neighborhoods in Toronto, right? And Toronto has, some years back, and I've been involved in a number of iterations of Toronto tourism strategies, and we began to realize that at one point that those are the features that are really appealing in our cities. So, and cities like Vancouver's done a lot to protect and the natural environment, right?
Yeah.
And, they're I forget what was it, Blue Oceans Initiative, and anyway, they were leading proponents of urban natural conservation initiatives, which I think is important too. Look at Toronto with the ravines and the waterfronts and so on. Those are really critical assets from a tourism perspective, and we need to build on those and protect them and enhance them and regenerate parts of them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's sort of from the perspective of drawing outsiders in. But then there's all the people that live here, that live in the community, and especially with the pandemic. As an example, two months ago, the front cover of Municipal World magazine had a photo of a park in Hamilton, Ontario. It said, "Parks are the new medicine."
Yeah.
The people during COVID couldn't travel; they couldn't go away. There was like staycations and without going out and being able to meet with people and do the things that we normally did, parks really became super important. And from a travel and tourism perspective, I'm wondering, Mike, if you could share some thoughts on how our cities, our mayors and our cities and towns can look to further, further that momentum to increase open space, to increase accessibility for all to public open space, and then the quality of it, and then improve it going forward. So for local tourism, local travel.
Well, first of all, let me say that a successful tourism destination has a direct correlation with the desirability of a city, for residents and for new people, right? I mean, there's it's a circle, right? So and you have to ensure that local residents are supportive of tourism and supportive of the directions for tourism. So they have to be engaged and involved in strategic tourism planning. That's critical, right? And then the other big point I would make is that domestic tourism is, in Canada anyways, that is always the bread and butter of most tourism establishments, right? I mean, I've done many, hotel feasibility studies, resort feasibility studies, attractions, museums, interpretive centers, etc. But the bread and butter is always going to be your domestic market. So
that's people that live there.
Yeah, people that live around. Kilometers or something, but out of their normal place of business and not including those commuting to work. But so yeah, we're all tourists, right? And when we go to visit a park, and when we go to come to Collingwood from Toronto or whatever, you're a tourist. So yeah, domestic and local tourism is critically important. And the international can be the icing on the cake, right? Is vitally important, but and they're looking for things that are unique and different, right? They don't want the same things they find in other cities. So
yeah, and when you'd mentioned about local buy-in and local acceptance and support for tourism, it's really, really important. I remember we were doing a project in one of the lakefront communities in Ontario, and they became super successful at tourism. And so many people, buses and buses of people flocked into that town, weekday, weekend, it didn't matter. And it inundated the town. And so the people that lived there, the residents, they couldn't get parking. Sometimes the supplies were sold out. They couldn't go to a restaurant because the restaurants were booked, months in advance. So they came up with the saying, "Be careful what you wish for."
Yeah, well, that's one of the big issues that CREST is tackling, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, over tourism, right?
Yeah.
A term that was coined a number of years ago, and we've all heard about the extreme examples and situations in cities like Venice and Barcelona and Dubrovnik and so on, right?
Yeah.
Where the number of people, like Dubrovnik's a good example because it's a historic walled city, right?
Yeah.
And an incredible place, but it's the cruise ship, when the cruise ships come in, there can be 5, 6, 7. Same with Venice, right? They disembark and there's people coming in just for the day. It's overloaded and it degrades from the experience of all the tourists. And they got to the point where local residents were doing things to discourage tourists, right?
That's not healthy.
No, it's not. So there's a lot of work being done by those cities, but facilitated by CREST to try and come up with solutions to some of the issues like over tourism, which will come back, right? And
Yeah.
we've started to experience over tourism in our parks.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, and so it's not just a big international situation. It can happen everywhere. So
yeah,
you have to. That comes back to the whole responsibility of cities and their designated entities, usually DMOs, to manage the destination, disperse. And there's all kinds of solutions and tactics that are being used in different jurisdictions that we can learn from and apply in our own cities.
Yeah, really interesting. And how, one of my last questions, Mike, how can residents contribute now as we're coming out of COVID, out of the pandemic and re-entering more normal conditions, contribute to responsible travel?
Yeah, well, we can all, become more responsible travelers and try and select travel suppliers who are more responsible, practice, more responsible forms of transportation or operation, etc. But that's, I guess, we all need to get engaged in our urban situations as well. And when there is an opportunity to have involvement in strategic tourism planning, and all good strategic tourism planning will have a public engagement process.
Yeah,
you should get involved and try and shape the future of the tourism in our own jurisdictions where we live. Right?
Yeah, and you'd mentioned about education,
yes,
as well, and to continue to educate ourselves about options, about over tourism, about our cultural resources. So many communities have cultural master plans now, and which a lot of our communities we kind of take for granted or we ignore, and there's such wonderful stories and legacies that we can enjoy and learn from in our communities. Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time on this beautiful July morning. Any last words you'd like to share with the audience?
A big thing for cities is we historically, cities have always, and politicians have partly driven this, is we focused on numbers, right?
Yeah.
And trying to increase the number of visitors that come to our cities, and that's been facilitated by mass tourism, like cruise tourism and so on. It's an easy way to increase the numbers pretty dramatically quickly. But the big messages in future strategic planning and planning for tourism in cities is focus on the type of visitors that are appropriate for your city and that your residents will appreciate having there, and focus more on the yield than the number, right? So
what do you mean by yield, Mike?
Bring in less visitors, and not constantly try to increase and just measure the numbers, but measure the benefits that tourists are providing to that destination. Right. That's economic, social, environmental, all of that. And we have to become better at accountability measurement and showing how tourism is impacting our cities in beneficial and negative ways, and then focus more on those types of tourists that are going to result in positive benefits for the local people, for the environment in that city, and economically as well, of course.
And I would imagine for the tourist as well, because if the offering is much more in alignment and it's congruous with the people and the location, the ecological carrying capacity and the culture, they're going to have a better time too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it'll be a much more authentic experience.
And that's what increasing numbers of tourists globally are looking for, right?
Yeah.
At least tourists we want to attract here.
Yeah.
Stay away from mass tourism. Focus on quality tourism, quality of tourism.
Yeah, quality of
in the local
experience.
community and retaining the benefits locally.
Amazing stuff.
All right.
Thank you so much, Mike. If you wouldn't mind just staying on till after the outro, and I'd like to just thank you again.
All right.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thank you for joining the Thriving Mayor Show. Make sure to like and share and tell your friends and colleagues. Mayors are awesome and are the change agents to enhance the quality of living for over 80% of us. Remember what Coach Wooden said, you cannot live a perfect day without doing something for someone who can never repay you. Much love and peace. Until next time.